My entire life, I had heard that Florida has some of the best fishing in the whole country. When I moved here in 2021, I started fishing right away and was fishing some of the bigger lakes like Lake Monroe, Lake Jesup, and was shocked to find how hard it was to even catch a fish. Most of the clips you're seeing right now are from the Wekiva River, which happened to be one of the only places I was able to catch fish in. That's when I did a little research and found the group Mighty River Recovery. This interview is with Joe, the executive director, and he goes into great detail about the decline of the fisheries in Central Florida and what can be done to fix it. My first question for you is, well, one, did you start Mighty River Recovery? And then what got you into it? Was there like an event that started all this?
Yeah, I'll give you the full story,
Okay.
but somewhat condensed.
Okay.
So, like a lot of people, I'm a Midwestern kid to start with. My dad and his generation and his buddies were all involved in Florida and Florida tourism, what you kind of would refer to as natural tourism, pre-Disney tourism. So when those guys were, my father and his friends were 20, 25, 30, about the time their families were having kids, they were coming to Florida to vacation, the old Winnebago, jump in the Winnebago and drive to Florida, the great American vacation in the that 60s and 70s. But they're coming for things like Silver Springs, Cypress Gardens, the Ocala National Forest. They're canoeing, they're going on glass bottom boat rides. They're doing tourism in Florida before Disney World. They were also very big fishermen. So when they would come down and fish, my dad and his buddies would fish. My mom and her friends would go to the beach or do whatever. But my dad, it was that true old school, old Florida bass fishing vacation. Take off into the wilds of Central Florida in the 1970s and early 80s, and bass fish at places like Rodman Reservoir and Orange Lake and the St. Johns River and all these places that had, without question, the best bass fishing in the world. They caught huge bass, and habitat was unparalleled. There was all kinds of vegetation. These fisheries were renowned all over the world. So as a kid at 10 or 12 years old, fast forward a little bit, and I'm 12 years old, 14 years old, and I'm getting into bass fishing, and I'm getting into fishing as a kid in the Midwest. And we're catching bass and we're doing all these things and having a great time. And I'm looking at these black and white photos of my father and his buddies with these gigantic 10-pound bass. And I'm going, where is that? Let's go there. So at about 12 years old, we came to Central Florida, and 12 years old for me. So that would have been, going on mid-1980s. And we went to places like the Ocklawaha River and Rodman Reservoir and the St. Johns River, and we bass fished and we caught big bass. And I fell in love, I thought, man, someday I'd love to live here. So all through my teens and my early 20s, I came to Florida at least annually, usually more than that. We'd fish for a week or 10 days. We'd catch big fish. We went to all these different places, had a great time, saw old Florida, saw the springs, saw the forest, saw these places. And then as an early adult, in my 20s and 30s, I came more and more, and I ended up working in the fishing industry, which allowed me to travel a lot, and a lot of my work was in Central Florida. Okay. And we would do sports shows in Orlando and Tampa and all these places. And during that time, I would also fish a lot with friends in Florida, and I spent more and more time in Florida doing these things, exploring Central Florida. And by the time I was in my 30s, I was coming to Florida for the summer. I was spending even more time. Well, life, happened, and fast forward 10 or 15 years, and my wife and I decided to relocate in Florida. And when we came to Florida and we came to the St. Johns River and we looked for a place to live, and we found a community that offered a lot of outdoor experiences, and I started to learn the St. Johns River, I was astonished how poor the fishing was and how poor the habitat was and how poor the resource, what condition it was in.
What year was that?
That was in 2014.
Is that around the time that it started to decline? Or
No. So yeah, we'll get to that. So I should also back up and tell you that when I went to school, which I went to Michigan State University, I got a degree in fisheries science.
Okay.
So my studies were fisheries science, limnology, fish and wildlife, habitat management, all those things, with the thought that I would probably go work for the government. Mm-hmm. That never happened. But my scientific knowledge and my scientific background kind of combined with my resource background when it came to working in the fishing industry and economics and tourism and all those things all combined. So I'm a fishing guy, but I'm a fish scientist kind of nerdy guy. Mm-hmm. And when we came here and we looked at the condition of the resource and knowing what I knew about tourism and about the draw of Florida and about, economics, I thought, why is it that the St. Johns River is in such bad shape and it's never really even been on my radar? I didn't even know about this. How is a place that literally drove hundreds of millions of dollars in tourism into this area, how has it declined to a state where I go on a giant body of water on a beautiful day and I see no one there? And then I saw how bad the fishing was. And while there were markers, and there always have been markers of decline of the St. Johns River, one thing that I saw too was we being Florida outdoors people, we're being fed this narrative that everything was great with the St. Johns River, or normal. And then in 2016 and 17, when we had a lot of high water, we lost a lot of our habitat as a result of high water, eelgrass and things, and that was this falling off point for the St. Johns River. But what I had seen, and what the people in the middle basin of the St. Johns River where I relocated to, and as I networked with people, I came to the understanding that a lot of places on the St. Johns River had lost habitat, had lost fishing, had lost tourism, had lost interest well before 2016. Mm-hmm. If you go to places like Lake Jesup, Lake Harney, Lake Poinsett, all those places lost their habitat in the early 2000s, if not before. These were places, and on Lake Jesup, it's hard to compare to historic numbers, but if you go all the way back to early 1900s, mid 1900s numbers, Lake Jesup, people went out and caught hundreds and hundreds of bass a day. Now you go there and you can barely catch a bass. So I saw that, and I saw all of this decline, and I saw all of this general acceptance of this decline. So it was just like you went to the fish camp that was almost out of business, and you said, what happened? And they go, well, the river kind of sucks. It's just been that way for a while. And you go to a place that, used to have a tackle store, or a place that sold shiners, or a convenience store. And everybody reported this general acceptance that the river was in a long state of decline, that people were now doing other things, that the economy that was built around it fell apart. But it all can be traced back to the loss of interest, which can be traced back to poor habitat. And the other thing that I saw that most Floridians didn't understand, especially around here, or that even, the government didn't understand, is when you go other places, you go to Lake Guntersville in Alabama, or you go to Lake Fork in Texas, or you go to Lake Murray in South Carolina, or even if you go to Fellsmere and some of the new bodies of water in the Fellsmere area in Florida, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of fishermen on those bodies of water every single day. There are tens of millions of dollars coming into those economies. And here we are on the doorstep of the biggest freshwater resource in the entire state of Florida with this accepted decline that nobody really cares. So I saw that, and then we also saw a lot of interest in Florida with other resource challenges, Everglades restoration, Indian River Lagoon issues, Mosquito Lagoon issues, springs issues and restoration, and dollars going towards springs. And we saw none of that coming to the St. Johns River. So I'm thinking, if they can restore and work on Crystal River, or if everybody's worried about Florida Bay, or all these other places, why is there no interest, dollars, legislation going towards the St. Johns River, which is, everyone can see, has fallen apart?
Right.
So when I took that question and that kind of mindset to other people in the DeLand community, which were, this was at one time probably the cornerstone of greatness of the St. Johns River, people said, why aren't we doing something? So at the time I worked a lot with the people at Highland Park Fish Camp, which is a small family-run, 5 or 6 generation fish camp. The people have been here forever. They're legendary people on the St. Johns River, captains and tour operators. And we talked about doing something, and they're still a huge important component of our group. And it was really the idea that we would put together something to help restore the waterways in and around that area. Lake Woodruff, Lake, Dexter, some of those places. When we looked at all of the problems that really existed with the St. Johns River and what it would take to have any kind of change, meaningful, resilient change, it became evident we needed a group that would work on the entire length of the river. So that's the whole backdrop. So when we founded Mighty River Recovery, I am written as the only founder. Mm-hmm. However, Bryn Adams from Highland Park Fish Camp, I consider my partner in founding this group.
Okay.
She's now part of our team. Immediately, we took several people from that community as board members, and then we pushed it forward. So those people helped me, captains and I mean, all kinds of people from that community helped me to really get Mighty River Recovery off the ground. But yes, it was my idea that I took to Highland Park Fish Camp that now has evolved into this big organization.
Are they still operating, or is that?
Yes. Yeah. Highland Park Fish Camp is still operating. Their business model has shifted away from bass fishing and guided trips like that. While they still offer some, it's more panfish fishing. The crappie fishing, black crappie or speckled perch fishing on the St. Johns is still very, very good. So they do a ton of business there. A lot of eco-tour type business. They're right in the Lake Woodruff National Wildlife Refuge. So it's a wonderful, wonderful part of Old Florida that is getting more and more popular as Old Florida gets compressed. Right. This is one corridor where we've really kind of been able to preserve it. So it's unlike anywhere else in Florida.
So that kind of leads to my next question. What's the main issue that the river's facing? Because what I know about is, herbicide use and then runoff from like fertilizer. That's kind of the extent of what I know. What's the main problem?
So when you look at the river as a whole, and Mighty River Recovery has been in business now for 2 years. And we started as a group that was just constantly trying to gather information and research, because in order to push anything forward, there is no impactful, true, legitimate data on what's going on with the St. Johns River. So while our Fish and Game people, FWC, and all these different groups that are involved, St. Johns Water Management District, all these people that are involved in helping and preserving and working with the river, there is not a backlog of research and data to rely on. Like, for instance, this body of water that's behind us. I don't know for sure, but I can almost assure you that there is no data on what plant species were in this water 30 years ago, before this fallout. Was there eelgrass? Probably. Was there hyacinths? Was there, all these different things, pickerel weed, all these different things. There's no source of data. So when we first started the group, we said, well, we need to cut through the narrative, cut through the acceptance of what's going on here, start delivering data. So as we built more and more data, we started to see what we needed to do moving forward. But during that time frame, our understanding of the problems with the river has changed quite a bit. The more you learn about something, the more you understand what the problems might be. But I can't tell you today what the single problems are with the St. Johns River and know in good conscience that 10 years from now, those might still be the same, because they have evolved. But what we see as the leading problems are nutrient increases all throughout the waters of the freshwater systems of Central Florida. Now, you'll hear a lot of different sides of where those nutrients come from. When you test this water, what they call pollutants can be phosphorus, nitrogen. Pollutants can be a lot of things. It could be mercury, it could be, chemicals, but in the case of nutrient pollution, it's phosphorus and nitrogen. The same things that grow plants, the same things that are used as fertilizer, the same things that are coming out of your septic tank are coming into these waterways, and they're making too many pollutants, too many nutrients in these waterways. They're being over-fertilized. Those come from agriculture, runoff, yard runoff, development, which would lead to people fertilizing their lawns and water eventually getting in, septic tanks and the discharge from septic tanks, which is urbanization, population growth, but they also come from the use of herbicides and the continued use of chemicals to kill plants, which then allows the nutrients from those plants to be basically put back into the system. Now, the plants aren't creating pollution, but by killing them continuously, you're reducing their ability to remove pollution. So we have all of these different things that are adding too many nutrients to the water. That's the first thing. The second thing is, that's a leading problem in the St. Johns River, is our water levels are higher. Now, it doesn't matter to me how you arrive at that, fact and what you use for justification. If you want to talk about sea level rise from climate change, if you want to talk about dredging in the Jacksonville Harbor, which has created a volume of water that now comes in and out of the headwater or the outlet of the St. Johns River, which is now tremendously different than it was in history. Water is coming into this system more now than it ever, because when we put up parking lots, water does not anymore percolate into the ground. It doesn't go into the plant life. It comes off the parking lots and it comes into the river. So those are things. We have more water than we've ever had. Scientifically proven. Our highest water events of the last 100 years have all been in the last 10. So we have higher water.
Is that a bad thing to have more water?
It is in the case if you want to try and grow plants and you want to maintain an ecosystem in this environment that allows light penetration to get to the bottom to continue to grow plants.
Okay.
The third thing that is, without question, detrimental to the St. Johns River is management, specifically the use of herbicides. So essentially, in that case, what's happened is the government, I'll say the government, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, FWC, some other entities, has managed the St. Johns River essentially the exact same way for the last 65 years. So when Florida's population was 1/20th of what it is today, when urbanization was almost non-existent in this area, when all these other stressors were not even apparent, they were using herbicides to control plants. Factor in all these other stressors and all these other issues, and they're still using herbicides to control plants. They haven't changed that at all. There's been talk of doing other things. There has never been a program put in place successfully on the St. Johns River to do anything with plants other than use herbicides. When you use herbicides, you constantly are not only recycling nutrients back in the system, but you're creating material that when the plants break down, make the water darker, cloudier, more turbid, and make it almost impossible for native plants to re-root to the bottom, regrow, and continue habitat. So what we have is a complete loss of habitat due to high water, due to poor management. We've lost all our eelgrass. We've lost all our bottom-rooted vegetation. We've dirtied and clouded the water, and everything we're doing is making it worse and worse and worse. And every time a plant grows to try and remove some nutrients from the system, we kill it and put the nutrients back in the system, add more silt, add more sedimentation, and make the problem worse. So higher water is dirtier, darker water that's more full of nutrients, that is causing more nutrient pollution, which is causing more algae blooms. And the only way out of this is to allow plants to grow. But instead of allowing plants to grow, we do like they've done here. And we come in and we kill all of these plants with herbicides. And you can even see right behind me, there's some hyacinths there that were killed. Those plants now are not only putting their nutrients back into the water, making the problem worse, but they'll become a fine sediment that will make this water darker and dirtier. And throughout time, mark my word, the eelgrass that is right here by this ramp will be reduced and eventually eliminated. So that's what we're seeing all along the river. We're killing our own habitat with our management practices.
With that, if we stop today using herbicides in the rivers,
right,
is that enough to restore the St. Johns, or is there too many other factors going on that it would take, like tackling some of those other things you talked about, like the runoff from fertilizer and sewage and whatnot?
Yeah. So and that's something we think about all the time, because first of all, there's pros and cons when it comes to restoration of, say, vegetation, eelgrass, different types of vegetation. The downside is it's not going to happen immediately. The upside is that nature in general is always trying to win that battle. And if you give it just the smallest little chance, you go across a parking lot and there's a weed growing out of a crack of a parking lot. And you say, how in the world can vegetation grow out of a parking lot? If you give it a chance, it will come through for you. If we stop the use of herbicides overall, the majority of the herbicide use on the St. Johns River, it would not immediately result in great blooms of native vegetation. But if we continue to operate the way we operate now, all we're doing is making it harder for us to do any restoration of the St. Johns River. Right now, all over the St. Johns River, there are a number of restoration projects designed to try and regrow bottom-rooted submerged aquatic vegetation, SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation. That's eelgrass and everything that grows on the bottom, which we traditionally had acres and acres of throughout the river. Those vegetations, that vegetation is not regrowing successfully, and one of the main reasons is because of water level, because of turbidity, because of material that's in the water that's a result of herbicides. So if we stopped herbicides, we would at least be taking a breath in the right direction towards not making it harder on ourselves. However, that material and that sedimentation and that turbidity and those high water issues are all still going to be there.
Right.
And we're not in a situation where we can go throughout the St. Johns River and remove all of the sedimentation or all the material that are causing our problems. But what we can do is we can figure out resilient, positive ways to begin to restore vegetation with a little help from man, like we're trying now, and then allow it to kind of run the course once it's got a foothold. And by not making the problem worse, we could start to see probably better gains. And then even more importantly, if we no longer use herbicides, we will still have to somehow manage invasive plants. Because like that plant right there, hyacinths, they grow quick. They don't grow as quick as what the government will tell you in most cases in Central Florida, but they grow rapidly to where if we do not manage those plants, they could seriously grow all the way across this channel probably in a year and make this an unusable body of water. But we can simply remove those plants. If we manually or mechanically remove those plants instead of using herbicides, then all of the phosphorus and nitrogen that's in those plants, which is a considerable amount, is removed from the system. So we have too many nutrients, algae blooms, too much sedimentation, all these things, but yet when we kill plants with herbicides, we're making all of those factors worse over and over and over.
Right.
So to get to restoration, we need to at least stop that bleeding and then work on restoration. And the further we go with plants, the more it will snowball. Because as soon as you get plants growing, they help all those other factors. They help your turbidity, they help your nutrient uptake. Plants are the key. So we need to get more plants to grow and not kill them and making it worse on our situation.
So you reminded me of something. I remember maybe it was a year ago, FWC put out a survey that I filled out kind of asking about herbicide use and kind of what people's preferences, whether to continue using herbicides or maybe try like mechanical harvesting like you mentioned.
Right.
I guess my next question is, of course, I'm sure you guys have talked to FWC. What has been their response? And then I want to ask you too about that mechanical harvesting. Is there much promise with that, or is that are there some issues with that too?
So when it comes to, I guess we could, kind of attack that as the whole of what you would do with plants instead of using herbicides and the effectiveness of these other methods. It's important to point out, first of all, that the vast majority of the St. Johns River when it comes to herbicide use is done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, not the FWC. The FWC does some, and the river is essentially divided. And the areas north of Christmas, Florida, which is, in the upper basin, the areas north of that are all done, which is Route 50. Those are all done by the Army Corps of Engineers, the vast majority. And south of that's done by the FWC. That's a cooperative shared agreement. There's a cost-sharing agreement there. So that's just how it all works, because the St. Johns is a big navigable waterway. It's done by federal control. So when it comes to mechanical harvesting or any kind of plant harvesting or managing invasive plants, whether we're talking about either group, Army Corps or FWC, the first thing to know is that the data that they use to justify the use of herbicides is absolutely skewed. And I can safely say that, whereas I used to just speculate that. We can absolutely tell you that the data they use for the growth of plants, for the amount of nutrients that are being put in the system, for the way it breaks down, for how much material is coming off the plants naturally, all those numbers and all of that narrative is skewed because it's built from controlled environment studies from 40 or 50 years ago. So essentially when they said, man, these invasive plants, these hyacinths are really bad, let's study them and figure out how bad they are, what we need to do. They did that. They did that in the 1970s and 80s in controlled environments, like literally tanks, that had nothing to do with the way plants reproduce or grow in the wilds of Florida. Some justification for concern, but you cannot use that data to then manage in a certain way. That's as different as saying, my trees in my yard grow as fast as they do in a nursery. You know, nobody can grow a tree like they can in a nursery.
Right.
So that's the first thing. We have these accepted narratives that our group investigates and fights every day, that this is the only way we can do this, is we have to use herbicides, because these plants, these are the narratives now, these plants will reproduce uncontrollably and take over our resources. So we understand that the plants do reproduce quickly. However, you know, it's a long step between that and the doom and gloom of these plants. The second thing to remember is when it comes to controlling invasive plants in the St. Johns River, we are talking almost exclusively about floating vegetation. Water hyacinths, water lettuce, pennywort, Cuban bulrush, alligator weed, some of these other things that float and get big mats on the surface. We're not talking about hydrilla. We're not talking about Eurasian milfoil or anything that grows off the bottom. Floating vegetation is extremely easy and cost effective to control through other harvest methods or through other methods other than herbicides, because you can physically see it, pick it up, and take it out. It can't run away from you. When it's gone, it's visibly gone, and it doesn't reproduce from something that's already rooted in the bottom. When you take that plant out, you take out its roots, you take out its young, you take everything out of the system. So we have the opportunity to control those plants in a way that would be very, very effective other than using herbicides. When it comes to mechanical harvesting or manual harvesting, there have been a few small pilot projects done in Florida about mechanical harvesting. Most of those were done on waterways outside the St. Johns River in different growing environments like Lake Okeechobee, where things grow differently than here. But regardless, most of them were decades old, and they were almost used as a proof of concept that would not work.
Okay.
What happened was recently, another group, an independent group, came in and did their own pilot project to show that it would work and you could use mechanical harvesting. And they have since pushed that pilot project through and are using it effectively on Lake Istapoga. It is a concept that absolutely does work. There are a lot of, parts of that concept that you have to figure out. What do you do with the plants? How do you transport the plants? What do you do with the material from the plants? All of those things, it's not as easy as me and you just picking that up and throwing it in our boat. We could do that if we had, 1,000 people on 1,000 boats. But if you had an operation that manually harvested these plants, it would be a massive operation that would be very costly, that would have to have a lot of components in place. However, they already have a massive operation that's extremely costly with huge components in place, and it's called herbicide control. Mm-hmm. There are dozens, if not hundreds of boats. There are hundreds of employees that spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on herbicides that go directly into our ecosystem year after year after year. So there's a general intolerance and a lack of willpower from the community, from our government in Florida, to look at anything else. This is the system. This is the way they do it. And it's never effectively been challenged, and no effective alternative has been brought, into the conversation. We are doing that. We are working on bringing an organized, data-based alternative solution to Florida of what we're going to do with these plants. And it's going to take a little while, but we will ultimately bring that to the table. And if that is not accepted, and it's an apples and apples comparison finally, then the people of Florida will know about it. But manual or mechanical harvesting of the plants is the way forward. If we go anywhere else in the world, and we present the scientific community with our situation. We have a 300-mile-long river with nutrient problems, habitat loss, tourism declines, all these different things. And we're plagued with invasive plants that we use herbicides for. All of the scientists in that room would say, step one, stop using herbicides. That is the only way forward. We cannot seem to get that into our heads in Florida, which is why one of the main reasons we founded our group was to bring a new way forward. So that is absolutely the way forward.
Kind of on that, do you think, is there some hesitation to switch methods because of cost? It sounds like mechanical harvesting, maybe, well, I would imagine the harvesters that they had or the machinery they had, 30, 40 years ago is probably not the same as what they have today.
Right.
Is it more of a technology issue, like the technology behind the machinery hasn't caught up?
It's twofold. So some of the reluctance to do that is, and again, some of this is speculative because I don't work for the Army Corps of Engineers. And I don't know if in the board meeting, when someone talks about, hey, can we do this? If someone says, no, we can't because of A, B, and C, or what those are. But I speculate that, number one, this is an ongoing business that year after year continues to operate, continues to get the job done, that involves a lot of people. Just like if you were a huge contractor and you had 50 vehicles or 100 vehicles on the road and you were going to change who you got your vehicles through. You know what I mean? You have a salesperson, you have a team that's been involved for years, you have contracts, they have chemical contracts, they have people involved in this, and their business moves this way. And at the end of the year, it's effective to control invasive plants. And according to their data and according to their narrative, I don't know how much they know, they are not effectively harming the ecosystem. We know they're harming the ecosystem dramatically. So for us, you have to get away from that business model, and that's a lot of steps. When it comes to the cost, it hasn't really been researched, unbiasedly to say exactly what it's going to cost A versus B. Will it cost more to mechanically harvest just in cost day one to get the job done to move those plants out than spraying them? I speculate that it will. It most likely will dramatically. But what we're not considering is if we continue to beat this ecosystem down and have a total fallout of this ecosystem, we are costing ourselves hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in tourism, in commerce, in quality of life, in property value declines. You can go buy a house, and I'm getting off subject here. You can buy a lot and a house on the water on many parts of the St. Johns River right now for less than what you can buy one for in a subdivision in an urban area, because no one wants to buy the houses that are on the water in many parts of the St. Johns River because they don't even use the water. There's no reason to, other than to drive around in a pontoon boat. So some of these places have lost property values more so than anywhere in Florida, especially anywhere on the water. They're not gaining in value like the others. So we've got that. So when you consider dollars to dollars of what you're costing the state of Florida with herbicides, it's not even comparable as herbicides continue to break down the resource. In terms of what's out there for equipment, there's nobody that's really bringing that to the table. There's some groups that have researched this, that have dialogued with people in other states that are using effective mechanical harvesting, and it's out there, and it can be done, and it's not particularly complicated. But there's still all of those things that we have to get moving forward. It's not as easy as just calling up the mechanical harvester guy and say, I'm at the Wekiva River, can you come grab some plants? Then there's the permitting issue, there's the invasive plant issue, there's dialogue and working with the game and fish people. There's all these different things. But again, this is one of those times in history when it comes to environmental awareness or some kind of cause that eventually we have to take this jump. It's just one of those things. And you could see with environmental toxins, you could see with the Clean Water Act or the Endangered Species Act or different things that we've done with pollutants in this country or herbicide use or whatever it is. There was a time that we said, okay, DDT is killing our wildlife. We can no longer use it. We can no longer rely strictly on herbicides to manage plants in Florida and the aquatic systems of Florida. There's too many people. There's too many stressors. The climate is too stressful. And we just can't do it. We can't get away with it any longer unless we want these all to be just waterways to run boats up and down. So that's where we're at. We're figuring out a way to bring that to the table once and for all.
One thing I just thought about, you talk about coming here as a kid, catching huge bass,
right?
All the ecotourism, the fish camps. Is there, how much, I guess, how much of a problem is it that the younger generation of anglers and people that come out and fish never knew that before, and so this is kind of the status quo for them, and you've got to convince them that things weren't always like that. Right. Is that something you're dealing with?
Yes. So that's a huge problem, even more than just people that are coming out and going fishing. So it's a huge problem with politicians, and it's a huge problem with tourism officials, and it's a huge problem with county government. Florida is wonderful, and 90+% of the people in Florida that you see every day haven't lived here for more than 10 or 15 years. Some have, but most haven't. And most of them are even shorter than that in how long they've been here. So they have no knowledge of what they're missing. And another aspect of it is, if you're a county government official and you see the St. Johns River as a potential source of tourism or of income or economic value, and you see where it's at now, you don't know what it was in 1985. And the people that had the big fish camp or the big resort or the big motel or whatever it was that was all tied into that, most of those people are no longer in business, and lots of them are no longer in Florida. So there's not a lot of anecdotal evidence, or there's not a lot of discussion. No one is sitting in the county council meeting saying, in 1992, we generated $3 million from fishing-related tourism to my hotel. That person is gone. That person is no longer saying that. Instead, they're replaced by someone that's trying to just figure out how to get more boaters to their tiki bar or whatever it is. So not only do the younger generation of anglers not see what we're missing here, but the younger generation or today's generation of county officials, of state officials, they have no idea what the St. Johns River, how it operated in the 1980s and 90s. Very, very, very few people do, that we found out. So it's hard. Unless they go to places where we have success with our resources, which equates to economic success and tourism and environmental resilience and all these different things that help your resource, unless they go to some of those places we talked about before, some of these world-class fisheries or waterways, they don't see what they're missing. They don't know what they're missing. Here's a perfect example. The Okefenokee Swamp, which is about 20 times larger than the Lake Woodruff National Wildlife Refuge. It's a huge, big resource. Very diverse, very interesting, unique eco-tour resource in southern Georgia and North Florida. The Okefenokee Swamp doesn't really offer fishing. It doesn't have a big airport nearby or any of the things that we have. And it still does close to 400,000 people a year in eco-tours. Wow. The Lake Woodruff National Wildlife Refuge probably does less than 100 that are truly coming to eco-tour that refuge. Right. It may be more than that, but it's not even comparable. And what people don't understand what they're missing is, if you have a great resource, whether it's for manatees, endangered species, birding, fishing, bass fishing, pan fishing, kayaking, all those things, people will come in droves to that resource. But the political people along the St. Johns River, most of them don't know that. They simply can't remember it, or they weren't here to remember it. So it's our job to start pushing that and showing that that's possible. The other problem is we don't have economic impact studies. We don't know the numbers of how many people came in the 1990s or early 2000s to the St. Johns River to fish or to do these things. We don't know. And when we go to the hotel operator and try and find out what their numbers were, they're gone. And the hotel and the big giant fish camp on the river is gone. So we don't have the records. We have one set of records from one fish camp that did 325 guided bass fishing trips in the early 1990s in a year on the St. Johns River. That was about their average, 300, 325. In 2012, they did 3. So what is going on there? Most of the other people are out of business. So it's hard for us. We don't have the data. We can't say what we're losing. We can't say what we've lost. We can't say what we can bring back once we bring it back. But anyone that's been to some of those other places, that's been to Lake Hartwell in South Carolina in the spring, that's been to Lake Guntersville in the summertime, that's been to some of these other world-class bass fisheries, that's just using one example, that's not necessarily fair, or that's been to Crystal River when the manatees are there, they can tell you, you cannot get a hotel room.
Right.
But in Florida, we're on the shores of the Wekiva River on a beautiful day. No one's out here. We haven't seen anybody. So that's where we're at. So it's difficult. So people don't know what they're missing or what could be out there. And that goes across the board for people that are involved. So we're trying to bring awareness to that.
You talk about collecting data. You've got sort of an alternative way to manage this river that you want to pitch to people that can actually make this change.
Right.
Are you feeling like you're getting any traction with that, or?
Well, it's kind of twofold. So in some degree, our organization believes, first of all, it's important to point out that everything we do is based on science. And while some people from the scientific community might say that, hey, I said something that they don't believe is true or whatever, we're going by data, we're collecting data, we're researching. And if there's other data out there that contradicts what we say, by all means, we want to see it and we want to learn about it. The main reason for that is there's almost no data on most of this stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, the number one plant report that you see for the growth of invasive plants in Florida was done in 1985 in a controlled environment. So, that's what we're managing on. That's laughable. Any scientist would tell you that's laughable to manage on something in water quality, water aquaculture or plant control that's 40-year-old data that's not even from the resource you're managing. So if there is other data, we want to know what that is. We see, when it comes to looking at what we're going to do for plant management, not a reluctance yet from the management community, because we haven't gone in their office and presented, here is the plan for the St. Johns River according to all of our data, according to costs and figures and facts, because we're still compiling that. And the reason we're still compiling that is because that data doesn't exist. So when we say, okay, we're going to come out here, just use this as an example, and we're going to go through all these invasive plants, or what have been, not even all these plants that have been treated with herbicides are invasives, but we're going to go to all these plants that have been treated with herbicides, and we're going to scoop them up, and we're going to put them on a barge, and we're going to grind them up, or we're going to do something with them that is a manual harvest. What does that look like? What does that cost look like? How do we present that? We haven't been able to do that yet, because no one from the government you would think would have done that has done that. They've continued to operate their business the same way for 60 years and never truthfully looked at viable alternatives, at least not in modern history. So because of that, we don't have reluctance, because we have to build all of the information from the ground floor before we can present it. On the other side, when it comes to restoration, when it comes to vegetation growth, when it comes to what's causing a lack of vegetation, we work hand in hand with many people from the FWC to help research and figure out what's causing these problems, because they simply do not look at all the variables. And they're more than willing to look at our data. They're more than willing to dialogue. We talk to them all the time. They're researchers and biologists, because they themselves want to know why it is that vegetation won't grow on the bottom of the St. Johns River. So we're doing things they simply will not do to try and help them help themselves. In the meantime, gather data to put together an alternative solution. We're kind of like a consultant for what might happen to this river in the future, and we're doing it with anyone's participation or cooperation that can truthfully, scientifically help us. But if they refuse to, then then they need to just get out of the way, because what they're doing is not working. That's evident.
So with doing, because what I'm imagining is you could do something like an A/B test, where you have let's say one part of the river that's treated with herbicides, another part treated with mechanical harvesting. But with the river, it's all sort of connected. So how do you truly kind of keep those tests pure without other external factors coming in? Could that be done on a lake, or is that something you've thought about?
Yeah. So when it comes, another thing that's important to point out is the use of herbicides and the aftermath of herbicide use is very dramatic. This looks very dramatic, and it's going to cause, it's going to cause problems with the water quality here. It's going to cause a lot of things that are going to impact the river. However, for the most part, one thing we did right off the bat is determine whether or not there are herbicides just floating around in the water. Are there herbicides in the soil from 60 years worth of use? Are there herbicides in the water? Because, like you said, if we want to do a test downstream from here and we're growing vegetation, if herbicides flow in and kill our vegetation, like, what are we accomplishing there? When it comes to herbicides, though, aquatic herbicides, they get in and out of the system pretty quick, and they affect what they hit real hard, but they really don't have a residual. Now, there is reason for concern that certain types of herbicides could have some, but for the initial testing that we did, and we were the only organization in Florida, government, 501 et al., that's ever tested for herbicides in the St. Johns River, which cost us a lot of money, but we wanted to know, and we found no herbicides. So the aftermath and the effect of these herbicides are really hurting the river, and the use of herbicides is hurting the river, but we don't feel that if we tested from A to B different places or researched or did some different things, that there's this overlap of water that's going to skew all of our data. The other thing is, when you go into the lakes around the St. Johns River, which is where a lot of your habitat loss really has occurred, all those lakes I mentioned before in the Middle Basin, Lake George, Lake Winder, Lake Jesup, these places, there is a cycling of water, but it's very slow, and you can kind of have different things set up in those lakes and not really have them overlapping. Your water conditions are going to be pretty similar. We do nutrient testing in the water all the time. Your phosphorus and nitrogen and things like that are going to be something that's very similar. But you could effectively say, how fast are the plants growing? How are we going to remove them? You could even go in and say, how many nutrients are we taking out when we remove the plants versus using herbicides? We're going in after herbicide use and testing nutrient levels in the water in and around herbicide use and finding that they're elevated, because after herbicides, the nutrients from the plant materials are then recycled back into the water. So we're seeing these nutrient swings. So we're looking at all these different things, but we can definitely come into some conclusive ideas of what is going on based on our research in different places. And the other thing is, too, that's unique, which isn't really discussed, is it's different in Lake George than it is in Lake Harney, than it is in the waters of the headwaters, than it is in Palatka. Most of those places have different problems. Some have things eating vegetation, some have nutrient problems, some have turbidity problems, but they're somewhat unique, so we need to really approach management uniquely. You can't manage this like you manage the main stem of the river. This is totally different. You can't manage this like you manage Lake Woodruff. It's totally different. But they manage it the same. They come in, and anything that's in the way, they spray with herbicides. That's all the management that's being done.
Follow-up question on that. What about fish? Have you guys done any tests to see, is it safe to eat fish out of these rivers and lakes?
Yeah, so consumption advisories and things like that, that's kind of out of our protocol. That's DEP, St. Johns River Water Management District. They're the ones that are going to be testing fish for mercury, for toxin levels. We don't really get into that. We can tell you that when it comes to fish in the river, though, that game fish numbers are at all-time lows in most places. Bass, especially largemouth bass numbers, Florida bass numbers in the St. Johns River, most places that they're sampled are at the lowest levels in recorded history. And that's true for Lake George, Lake Monroe, Lake Jesup, Lake Harney, Lake Woodruff, Lake Dexter, Lake Beersford, all those places. The bass population is not non-existent, but it is at a level that it's even, unrecognizable to Florida.
So, last question: what can fishermen or anglers do to support you?
Well, we always say the biggest thing you can do to support our group is become a member of Mighty River Recovery, and so there's a couple things probably to key on there. The first is our group, which is a 501c3, like a lot of other groups, is different in that we really do a lot of work in and on the water, and we are boots on the ground, grassroots style guys that are running the organization. You know, I'm in legislative meetings, I'm in Tallahassee, I'm talking to important people, the politics side. You know, we have a lot of different components to our group. But at the end of the day, we're on the river a lot, and we work hard to work on the river, doing restoration, doing planting plants, doing tests, you know, doing research, getting data so we can move some of these policies and these programs forward. So when if you donate to our group, or if you want to support our group in any way, that's what you're supporting. You're not supporting galas. You're not supporting, you know, big ticket item fundraisers. You're not supporting people that talk a good talk. You're supporting people that are wet in the water, you know, in all conditions, working on the river. The number one thing that people can do to support us, though, really is become a member of our group. And because we understand the value of people and how to drive this concept forward, our membership is totally free. And when you join our group, there's no reason to speculate anything other than you are joining for free to become a number to help us push forward. Because when I go to a legislative meeting or I talk to the Army Corps of Engineers or whoever it is, we say we have 800 members, we have 1,200 members, we have 2,000 members. And that number, as it grows, becomes more important and more valid. So everything is free when you join our group. We have merchandise people can buy, people can donate if they'd like, but everything is free. And you get a newsletter, you get stickers, you know, you get membership exclusives like that help keep you informed of what we do. The other thing is what we do is totally transparent and science-based. So if someone has a question, like, hey, did you guys talk to whoever this is? I think something here is not right or whatever it is, bring it on. Like we have community meetings specifically so people can get up and ask us questions, and they can ask us whatever they want. We have nothing to hide. We are there for the people. We started this group because we were a bunch of ticked off fishermen that got tired of our resource not getting any help that it deserves, and just the acceptance of this decline. So we stand for those people. Those are our members. All walks of life, you know, and we're involved with manatee issues, we're involved with endangered species issues, we're involved with fish and wildlife issues of all different walks of life. Ecotourism, paddle sports people, crabbers, shrimpers, boaters, hunters, you know, they're all using the river, and it's like nobody's standing up for them. That's our group. So the number one thing a person can do is go to mightyriverrecovery.org and sign up for a free membership. And from there, you know, figure out what else you want to do to help us. We have fundraisers, we have volunteer opportunities, we have events we go to, we have, you know, we always need donors, but sign up to be a member. It helps. And follow us on social media. Our social media page is huge, and we get, you know, we put real world stuff on our pages, videos that we shoot from the river. So that's the thing. If you want a group that believes in you, that you can believe in, that's got your back, it's Mighty River Recovery for sure.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming out and doing this interview.
Sure.
Like I said, I fish here all the time. I fish Lake Monroe, Lake Jesup. So
yeah, we appreciate it.
Good to hear from you and kind of hear what's going on out here.
Yeah, and you know, I hope that we get a chance to do it again, because interviews I gave a year ago are totally different. Not totally, but they're noticeably different than they are today. Like our group has a lot more momentum today. We're getting a lot more done, and hopefully this time next year we'll even be able to say more of what we're doing in the following year and the following year, because it's a growing, dynamic thing. The more we learn about, you know, the hurdles to overcome, the more we have to kind of flex and pivot. But we focus the same. You know, I probably should wrap up. We focus the same three things, everything we do. We have three parts to our organization, and that is working on fish and wildlife habitat, figuring out the declines, working on the declines in water quality, and working on the accepted use and the narrative around herbicides and the long-term impacts of those herbicides and how they're affecting our ecosystem. So every day we're working on either fish, wildlife habitat, water quality, or herbicides. And usually it's all three. So that's what people get from us.
Cool. That sounds good.
Thank you, sir.